The sun hung like a curse over Millfield, a dying town gasping under the weight of dust and silence. In its center, where the old auction boards cracked with time and heat, a fragile figure stood alone, worn cotton clinging to her swollen belly, her eyes fixed ahead with the hollow stillness of someone who had cried themselves dry long ago. Lila Monroe's fingers clenched the rope of her family's last milk cow like it was the thread of her soul. Her children, barefoot, bruised by hunger and too tired to cry, sat motionless in the wagon behind her. Caleb, only 8, held his sister's hand like a soldier shielding a comrade. Rosie was 5 and thin as a reed, her dress patched with mismatched cloth and her lips cracked from thirst. Their mother had braided her hair that morning with trembling hands, as if pretending that some sense of dignity still mattered. The cow was all they had. She'd already pawned the wedding ring that once shimmered on her finger, her Bible, her father's hunting rifle, the iron skillet her mother left her. Gone. Everything had been traded for flour, candles, medicine. All gone now. Only the cow remained. And if she went today, the milk would go with her, and so would the last hope of getting through winter. But there was no choice. Hunger didn't wait for miracles. It devoured silently, steadily, like the dust that coated their throats and the silence that filled their nights. The auctioneer's voice crackled, hoarse from years of barking false hope. "Starting at $20. She's young, still milking good. Look at her teats, gentlemen. Bred strong. Good enough to keep your kids from dying." Lila flinched, not because of the words, but because of the way the men looked at her. Not the cow, her, the way their eyes slid over her curves beneath her stretched cotton dress, judging, calculating. She was nothing more than another creature up for trade. She kept her eyes down, jaw tight. 25. 30. 40. The numbers rose like dry thunder over cracked earth. The cow shifted, uneasy under the heat and the stares. Lila whispered softly to her, the same lullaby she used for Rosie at night. The cow calmed. The children remained silent. Then the murmurs shifted. Bootsteps, firm, measured, the sound of money and purpose. A man stepped forward from the crowd. His shadow fell long and commanding, boots polished despite the dust, hat tilted low, the kind of man who could buy half the county and never feel the loss. Grayson Vance. Everyone knew his name. 3 counties whispered about him, some with envy, others with fear. He owned more land than the town itself. His cattle grazed where the sun never touched twice in the same day. He was power wrapped in silence. And now he was here, bidding on a poor woman's cow. 55, he said, voice steady, like he wasn't bidding, he was declaring. Silence. Then the gavel fell. Sold. The cow jerked under the sudden shift of fate. Lila's fingers didn't move. She stared at the dust between her feet, numb. She'd saved her children's lives. For now. But the ache of letting go spread through her, belly like cold water. She was about to untie the rope, to hand over what remained of her world, when something strange happened. Grayson Vance didn't take the rope. He looked at her, then he looked at the children, and without a word, he reached into his coat, pulled out a rolled paper, money, more than she'd seen in her lifetime, and tucked it inside the breast pocket of her dress like he was planting a flag. Then he stepped back and turned away. The cow still standing, beside her. The crowd gasped. The auctioneer opened his mouth but said nothing. Grayson Vance had bought the cow, but left it with her. She staggered back, her hand clutching the bills inside her dress. Not stolen, not borrowed. Given. The sun burned hotter, her vision blurred. She was going to fall. Then, out of the crowd, a voice broke the silence. She doesn't deserve that cow, or that money. A man stepped forward, dirty hat, crooked grin. Her late husband's cousin, Marvin, the same man who once offered to help her through the night, just weeks after her husband's burial. The same man who tried to take Rosie's blanket in the dead of winter because she didn't need it as bad as he did. "She's a liar," Marvin growled. "She's carrying another man's child. Ain't even her dead husband's." The Cowboy silence broke into chaos. Lila's breath caught in her throat. Rosie started to cry. Caleb looked at his mother in terror, but Lila didn't say a word. She simply closed her eyes, because what Marvin said wasn't entirely a lie. It was something far worse. It was a half-truth, and those always destroyed more than full lies ever could. The air was still, but the tension moved like a snake through the crowd. Marvin's voice had cracked something open, not just in Lila, but in the townsfolk, who had nothing better to do than devour gossip like it was supper. She stood there, fists clenched at her sides, Grayson Vance's money pressed against her, heart like a brand, and yet all she felt was the heat of shame licking at her skin. "Say something, Lila," Marvin shouted, stepping closer. "You gonna just stand there like a mute snake? Tell these folks what you done." But she didn't speak. She couldn't. Her tongue was heavy, her throat dry as stone, because silence, she had learned, was sometimes safer than the truth. Behind her, Rosie whimpered. Caleb climbed down from the wagon, walked up to his mother, and wrapped an arm around her waist, glaring up at Marvin with a hatred too sharp for a boy his age. "She ain't done nothing wrong," he said quietly, steady. Marvin sneered. "Boy don't even know. Who his daddy is, probably. You all been fed on lies." A murmur spread through the gathering. Someone spit in the dust. Someone else muttered a curse under their breath. And still, Grayson Vance said nothing. He stood near the edge of the crowd, arms folded, face unreadable. Not once had he looked away from Lila. The auctioneer cleared his throat, awkward now, as if trying to reset the town's broken breath. "All right, folks, let's get back to business. That cow's been paid for. Ain't nothing more to see here." But there was, because Millfield wasn't the kind of place where a scandal just died in the dirt. It echoed in parlors and prayer, meetings behind laundry lines and whiskey bottles. By nightfall, every oil lamp in town flickered with whispers. Lila made it home, barely. The cow followed, loyal and unaware. Her children curled into one another on the straw mattress, exhausted. But Lila sat on the porch, arms around her belly, staring into the dark. She thought of Thomas Monroe, her husband, the way he laughed, with his head thrown back, the way he'd lift Rosie into the air like she was weightless, even when the war left him limping. She remembered his last words before the fever took him, when he whispered, "If they come for you after I'm gone, don't let 'em break you. Not them, not anyone." But they had come, not with guns or fists, but with whispers and hands that lingered too long. After his funeral, the same men who laid flowers on his grave came to her door with offers wrapped in pity and lust. And then came that one night. One mistake. One fire-lit hour of weakness, with a man who said the right words in the right tone and vanished before morning. She didn't even know his full name, just his eyes. Green, like dying grass. The baby stirred inside her now, as if remembering too. She had never planned to hide it, but silence became armor, and soon that armor became prison. The next morning she went into town, head high, dress clean, children fed. The money Grayson Vance had given her was still untouched, hidden under a loose floorboard. She hadn't used a cent. People stared. Some spat near her feet. Others pretended not to see her. Even the grocer's wife, who once wept beside her at the chapel, turned her back without a word. She was no longer poor Lila Monroe. She was that woman now. When she stepped out of the store, carrying a sack of flour she'd paid for with the last of her own pennies, Grayson Vance was waiting. He didn't speak, just held open the reins of a sleek black mare. "For you," he said simply. "I didn't ask for help," she replied, trying to walk past him. "I didn't ask for permission," he said. She stopped. "I don't owe you," she said, turning slowly. "I know. Then why are you doing this?" He looked at her long, then said, "Because someone once helped my mother when she was too proud to beg, and I'm tired of watching this town punish good women for surviving." Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something. Thank you, maybe, or nothing at all. But before she could find the words, a sudden sound ripped through the air. Gunfire. A scream. Then Rosie's voice, shrill and terrified. "Mama!" Lila spun, dropping the sack of flour. Down the street, a horse had reared up. A wagon had overturned. Rosie was standing in the middle of the road, alone. And Marvin was there too, dragging Caleb by the arm, his other hand on his holster. "You think you can shame me in front of the whole town?" he roared. "That boy ain't got no father. He needs discipline." Lila ran, but Grayson was faster. He was already pulling his revolver from the saddle holster, already moving toward the boy, already shouting, "Let him go, Marvin." But Marvin only laughed, then pointed his gun straight at Caleb's head. The air cracked with tension, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Caleb stood frozen, Marvin's filthy hand clutching his arm, the barrel of a rusted pistol aimed at his temple. Rosie screamed again, but her voice vanished under the roar of the wind and the horror in her mother's eyes. Lila didn't think. She didn't breathe. She just ran. But Grayson Vance was already there, boots pounding over dirt, revolver raised, calm as steel. "Put it down, Marvin," he said, voice even. "You're not thinking straight." Marvin's eyes were wild, red-rimmed. He hadn't come for justice. He'd come for spectacle. "He's not even her husband's son," Marvin bellowed, spittle flying. "And the town knows it. What kind of woman lies like that and walks away with charity like a queen?" Grayson stepped forward, slow, controlled. "You shoot that boy," he said, "and I'll make sure the last face you see is mine." Lila was just feet away now, heart slamming against her ribs, arms outstretched like she could shield her child with nothing but her body and bones. But Caleb, brave, steady Caleb, looked Marvin dead in the eyes and said softly, "You're a coward." The words cut deeper than any bullet. Marvin snarled and turned the gun toward Grayson, but that was all he had time to do. Grayson fired. One clean shot. The gun flew from Marvin's hand, blood streaked across his knuckles as he screamed and dropped to the dirt. The townspeople who had gathered gasped, backing away like dry leaves scattered by thunder. Lila reached Caleb, pulling him into her arms, cradling his face, whispering his name over and over again. He was safe, he was whole, but her hands shook, like winter had sunk into her blood. Grayson didn't move, didn't gloat. He simply holstered his weapon, then turned to face the town. "You want to shame someone?" he asked. "Shame this man for threatening a child, for dragging his own cousin through the dirt when she already had nothing left." No one spoke. He turned back to Marvin, now whimpering and crawling backward like a rat. "Next time you raise a weapon in my town, it won't be your hand that bleeds." And then, for the first time, Grayson looked at Lila, really looked at her, and something deep and unspoken passed between them. A recognition, a memory. Later that night, when the wind died down and the dust settled on Millfield's streets, Lila lit a single candle and sat across the wooden table from Grayson Vance. Her children were asleep. The cow fed, the house quiet. Grayson placed a worn envelope on the table. "I should have given you this long ago," he said. Lila stared at it, not touching it. "What is it?" "A letter. From the man you met in the spring before your husband died. Her breath hitched. His voice dropped. The man with green eyes. Her hands trembled. She hadn't said that to anyone, not even in her prayers. Only one person knew that secret. She picked up the envelope with hesitant fingers, opened it slowly. The handwriting was rough, unfamiliar, but the words were unmistakable. Lila, I'm C. Sorry I disappeared. I didn't mean to make you carry the weight of that night alone. I left because I was afraid. Afraid of being unworthy. Afraid of what I'd done to you. But I told someone. Someone I trust more than anyone. If anything ever happened to you, I asked him to look after you. That man is Grayson Vance. He is my half-brother. Forgive me if you can. James. Lila covered her mouth, eyes wide. The room spun. Grayson nodded slowly. He came to me a year ago, told me about you. Then he vanished in a border skirmish. His body was never found. Tears slid down Lila's face, silent, unstoppable. He loved you, Grayson said gently, and he made me swear that if you ever needed help, I wouldn't let you fall. Lila shook her head. But why didn't you tell me before? Because you were grieving, he said, and because I didn't know if the baby was his, or if you'd even want to see me. I was waiting, but I saw Marvin raise that gun, and I knew waiting had cost too much already, she whispered. So all this, the cow, the money. He nodded. I wasn't saving a stranger. I was keeping a promise. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere a dog barked in the distance. The night was still again. Grayson reached across the table and laid his hand gently over hers. Not in possession, not in pity, but in quiet understanding. You don't owe me, he said, but you deserve better than this town's judgment. And for the first time in months, Lila exhaled. Really exhaled. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Next morning, the sun rose over Millfield like it always did, slow, red, and heavy with heat. But something had shifted. The silence in the town wasn't ordinary. It was thick, watchful, full of unsaid things. Lila Monroe stepped onto her porch, apron tied, her hair brushed back. Caleb fed the cow in the yard. Rosie swept dust off the wooden steps, humming under her breath like nothing had happened. But they all knew better. Because when a woman dares survive in Millfield, it offends the people who wanted her to stay broken. That afternoon, the whispers returned. Only now they were colder, quieter, more deliberate. She took charity from 2 brothers, seduced one, bore a bastard, and now clings to the other like a leech. She's dangerous, shameless. She brings sin into decent homes. No one said these words to her face, but doors stopped opening. Church pews suddenly filled to leave no room. Rosie came home crying because the other children wouldn't play with her. Caleb returned with torn sleeves and bruises. He swore he got from a fence post, and still. Lila held her head high, but even stone breaks under enough pressure. One night, long after the children had gone to bed, a fire sparked on the Monroe porch, not from her lantern, but from a bottle of kerosene and a burning rag thrown by unseen hands. She awoke to smoke. Grayson came riding fast, seeing the flames from his ranch. Together, he and Lila doused the fire with water, hands raw, lungs choking. The damage was small, but the message was loud. Leave. She stood in the ash-streaked yard, hair wet, hands shaking. Grayson stood beside her, jaw clenched, fury radiating from his chest like heat off a forge. I should have known they wouldn't stop, he said. Lila looked down at her hands. They don't want justice. They want me gone. You don't have to prove anything to them. I'm not trying to prove anything, she said, her voice quiet. I just wanted to survive." He stepped closer. "Then let me take you away. To my ranch. It's far from town. The children can grow up without shame breathing down their necks." She looked up at him. "And live like a kept woman? In hiding? Like a scandal buried in the hills?" "No," he said. "As family. If you want it. You and your children." She didn't answer, because part of her did want that safety, that shield. But another part, deep and old, knew running wasn't winning. 2 days later, the town held its summer festival. A tradition, where children ran races and pies were judged, and prayers were said beneath the wide blue sky. It was the kind of gathering where people pretended to be kind for one day and returned to cruelty the next. Lila dressed in her plainest dress, washed the children, walked into the square holding Rosie's hand. The crowd parted, not out of respect, but like something foul had arrived. She stepped onto the wooden platform where contests were held, raised her voice. "I have something to say." The crowd froze. Whispers sparked. Even the preacher's mouth tightened. "I was married to a good man who died too young, and after his death, I made a mistake. A human one. A man passed through town, said kind things. I was lonely, I was lost, and I gave him something I couldn't take back." Gasps rippled like wind over wheat. "But he left," she continued, "and I bore a child alone. I didn't lie, I didn't deceive. I just tried to protect what little dignity I had left. And if that makes me wicked, then so be it." She looked around at the crowd. "At least I've never set fire to someone's home in the name of righteousness." That silenced them. Then she stepped down, took Caleb's hand, and began to walk away, until a woman's voice called out, "Wait." It was Mrs. Alden, the preacher's wife, elderly, sharp-tongued, respected by all. She stepped forward, slowly. "My sister," she said, "was left with child after a soldier vanished during the war." Folks judged her. She nearly drank herself into the grave. Lila blinked, uncertain. "I judged her too," the old woman added softly, "until I saw what it cost her." Then she turned to the crowd. "You'll have to decide today, Will. You punish a woman for surviving, or will you finally bury your stones?" No one answered. But no one spoke against her either. Sometimes silence is surrender. Later that night, as the stars blanketed Millfield, Grayson sat on Lila's porch again, as he had so many nights before. "You could have left," he said. "Why didn't you?" She smiled faintly, holding her belly. "Because if I ran every time someone hated me, I'd never stop running. And I want my children to grow roots, not scars." He looked at her for a long time, then reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a chain, with a single gold ring. "I think James meant to give this to you," he said, placing it in her hand. Lila closed her fingers around it, tears brimming. She looked at Grayson. "Thank you for keeping your promise." And he said, "It wasn't just his promise anymore. It's mine now." She didn't answer in words. She just reached for his hand. And for the first time since that long, terrible winter, she felt warm. Grayson Vance was a man known for many things: his vast land, his calm temper, his horses that could outlast a thunderstorm. But that summer, the people of Millfield began to speak of him in hushed tones, like he'd taken a step into some unknown place where honor blurred and love looked too much like rebellion. He no longer ate at the saloon, no longer nodded at the men who once called him Sir. Instead, he spent his evenings on Lila Monroe's porch, whittling quiet things out of cedar and oak, things Rosie clutched in her tiny fists, and Caleb tried to mimic with a pocket knife far too dull for carving. And Lila, she let him stay. Not because she needed his strength, but because, for the first time, She didn't feel like she had to earn it. The town watched, and the town judged. But judgment had worn itself thin, and when it couldn't burn her home or bruise her children, it shrank like a snake without fangs, curling back into its corners. Still, peace in a place like Millfield was like water in a desert. It never stayed long. One Sunday morning, after the sermon had ended and the town had gone back to its familiar pretending, the sheriff rode up to Grayson's ranch with dust on his boots and a telegram in his hand. "You need to read this," he said, his face stiff as cracked leather. Grayson took the paper and unfolded it. His eyes scanned the words, slow, then faster. His jaw locked. Lila saw his shoulders tighten from across the yard. He didn't speak until they were alone inside. "The government's sending surveyors," he said quietly. "They're cutting lines through the county for the new railroad. Millfield's sitting on prime route land. They want to run steel right through the valley." Lila frowned. "Isn't that good? Progress?" He shook his head. "It means they'll offer to buy land, and if folks refuse, they'll take it anyway." He nodded once. "But what does that have to do with you?" she asked. He turned to her then, really turned. "Because I own the biggest ranch between here and the river, and my refusal makes me their problem." She studied his face. "So they'll push you out." He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the hearth, pulled down a map, and pointed. "They're coming through here, and they'll want this house, and they'll offer money. But if I don't sell, they'll take it under the pretense of eminent domain, claim it's for public good, that it's for the future." Lila was silent a long while. Then she said, "So they'll tear down the only peace we've known?" "Yes." And then she asked the question she hadn't dared speak aloud until now. "What if we went somewhere else, Grayson? Took the children, started fresh?" He looked at her. "You want to run after all this?" "I want safety," she said. "I want a life that doesn't require guarding the front door every night." Grayson's eyes softened, but he said nothing. That night, while Rosie slept with her doll carved from cedar and Caleb leaned against the window frame watching stars, Grayson and Lila sat beneath the stars, not touching, not speaking, just listening to the slow death of a dream. Then Caleb said something they hadn't expected. "I don't want to go," he said, voice steady. Lila turned. "Why?" "Because this is the first place I've felt like I belonged," he said. "Even when they hate us, I feel like we're part of the land now, like Daddy's still watching, like he knows we didn't run." That night, Lila sat, awake long after everyone else had gone to sleep. She watched the moon travel across the sky. She thought of fire, of bullets, of names whispered like curses. And she thought of hands, Grayson's hands, scarred and gentle, that had never once tried to own her, only protect her. By dawn, she knew what she had to do. She walked to the barn where Grayson was feeding the horses. "I won't leave," she said simply. He looked up. "I was afraid," she said. "But if they want this land, they'll have to tear it from both our hands." He walked to her slowly, like a man approaching something sacred. And for the first time, he kissed her, softly, like a prayer. They came with rolled-up maps and iron voices. The railroad men, backed by papers stamped in Washington ink, and a sheriff whose badge glinted more like silver than justice. 3 black-coated agents stepped onto the Monroe land just as the sun bent toward dusk, shadows long like warnings across the fields. Lila watched from the porch, her hand resting on her belly. Caleb stood beside her, jaw clenched, a boy trying to be steel. Rosie gripped her doll tighter, sensing something wrong, even if she didn't understand. Grayson didn't wait. He walked out to meet them in the open, his hat tilted low, boots steady. "We've come to finalize the purchase," one of the men said, unrolling a crisp document. "You have 24 hours to vacate. Payment's been transferred to your name. Resistance will be considered obstruction of federal development." "I never signed anything," Grayson said flatly. "You didn't need to," the man replied. "The land passed to the county 3 days ago through eminent domain. You've already lost." Behind him, the sheriff lowered his gaze, ashamed, but silent. Lila stepped forward then, voice calm. "You don't own what you've never understood. This land was bought with a man's sweat, and kept alive by the hands of a widow and 2 children you spit on." The man didn't flinch. "You've made your choices, ma'am. Now make your exit." But it wasn't Grayson who moved. It was Caleb. The boy stepped forward and shouted, "This land belonged to my father. His blood's in this dirt. You think we'll give it away like rusted nails?" One of the agents laughed. "Boy, blood washes off." Grayson's hand went to his hip, not for a weapon, but for a letter. He pulled it from his coat and handed it to the sheriff. "Read it." The sheriff opened it. His eyes flicked back and forth, narrowing. "This is James Monroe's will," he murmured, "signed and sealed. He left the land to his unborn child," Grayson said, "which means Caleb is the rightful heir, and the government can't seize land owned by a minor without due process." The agent stiffened. "That paper won't hold in court," one snapped. "Maybe not in yours," Lila said, "but we'll bury you in ours." Behind them, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Alden stepped out from behind the fence. Then Mr. Merton, the feed store owner. Then the preacher. One by one, townsfolk who once whispered now gathered near. "The gate. I stand with them," Mrs. Alden said. "I do too," said the preacher. "They've earned that land more than any map maker in Washington." "Enough," the agent barked. "This isn't your fight." But the people didn't move. And for the first time in months, Lila felt something break, not inside her, but around her. The fear the town once wore like armor was cracking, because kindness, when consistent, turns enemies into mirrors, and shame has no power when truth stands in daylight. The railroad men left that evening, not with land, not with victory, but with silence hanging behind their polished boots. That night, Millfield was quieter than it had ever been. The stars felt closer. The wind gentler. Inside the farmhouse, Lila tucked Rosie into bed while Caleb sat polishing an old photograph of his father. Grayson stood at the door, watching her, holding something behind his back. When she turned, he stepped forward and handed her a small wooden box. Inside was a single key. "To the ranch," he said softly. "To all of it. I'm giving it to you. To Caleb. This land should be yours, truly. My name's never needed to be on it." She stared at him, breath caught. "You're giving up everything?" she whispered. "I'm not giving up," he said. "I'm setting roots where they matter." She didn't speak. She just reached for his hand and placed the key back in it. "We keep it together," she said. "Not yours, not mine, ours." And for the first time, neither of them flinched from the word,